Welcome to the Ben Wood Johnson podcast. You can visit Dr. Johnson's blog at benwoodpost.com. Dr. Johnson's works can be found at drbenwoodjohnson.com. You can also support Dr. Johnson on Patreon, the link to which is in the description. Hello, everybody. Hello. Welcome back to the Ben Wood Johnson podcast. Welcome back for another episode. Welcome back for another season. Today is June the 7th, 2021. This is podcast number 67. Again, this is a new season. We are going to talk about crime. Now, crime in society is a scourge, some might say. People are criminal. People do bad things. People deserve to be locked up. And that's the way we understand crime. And there's also this idea that when people do commit crime, it is because they made a choice. It's a deliberate choice to do this evil, so to speak. So in this podcast, we're going to sort of debunk the notion of choice. Hence, the name of the podcast, The Flaw in the Logic of Choice. So what that means is that we're going to sort of undermine this understanding because it is erroneous. And it is also a mistaken belief, which is the underpinning of criminal law, of crime and punishment. This is going to be the foundation of this season, because this season is going to focus on the concept of crime in society. We're going to discuss the ramifications of crime and how crime is understood or how crime is misunderstood. Without further ado, let us delve right into it. There's a flaw in the logic of choice. It's always fascinating to hear people talk about, choice. The idea that you have choices, you make choices. And when you ask them a simple question, when do we start making choices? Is there a point where we begin making choices? Is there a point where we don't know what choices are? Is there a point where choices are made for us? We have to go back to this idea. If there's a point where choices are made for us, then what are the consequences of those choices? And if choices have been made for us, at which point do we own those choices? At which point when they become our choices? For example, if I were born in Haiti, was that a choice I made? But suppose that this wasn't my choice, and suppose that this was my parents' choice, right? At which point does it become my choice? At which point do I own being a Haitian? At which point do I own being who I am, who I was born into? And when I start acting according to that thing that I have become, that thing that I am, at which point do I own those actions? So the whole logic in the idea of choice is flawed, because the individual could not have made choices if the individual did not make any choice, if the individual did not at the inception decide who he or she would become, where she would be, who she would be. So those are not choices. At least those are not choices made by the individual. Okay, those are conjectures. The individual finds himself in a conjecture. He finds himself in a state of fact. And he has to adapt, adjust to this reality. And everything he does or doesn't do is incumbent upon that reality, which is already been determined. Now, of course, some people say, well, this is a deterministic argument. But again, we have to go back to what does that mean? when you say deterministic argument, what does that mean? Because some of the things we have to understand about this idea of deterministic argument is that there are certain things that have already been predisposed, predetermined, preordained. That is not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about things that have already predisposed. We're not talking about a future that has already been laid out, where all you have to do is follow this future. Yeah, in that sense, we're not talking about choice. We're talking about certain things that have already been decided. We're not talking about this. We're talking about the reality, which is not necessarily preordained. Nevertheless, what happens in that reality is already there are certain conditions, there's certain precursors that made it possible for these things to happen. But the individual in the process has no choice but to follow those precursors, because some choices have already been made ahead of time. And whatever the individual does in the process is not going to be determined or based on what he or she wants to do. It's going to be determined based on what he or she was made to be. Thereby, what he is not based on what he wanted to be. It is based on what's already been determined as to who or what he would be. And everything he does is going to be based on that. The guy stole a watch. He was sent to prison for 17 years. According to this show I was watching. And Batman said to the guy, I believe in choice. You made a choice and you have to pay for it for the rest of your life. But the question is, which choice Batman is referring to? Is it the choice where the guy stole the watch? Or is it the choice where he found himself in a situation where he needs to steal a watch? Because those are choices as well. Because before he stole the watch, he made choices that put him in a situation where stealing a watch was the only thing to do. Okay? So which choice is Batman talking about? The choice that was made after the choice that was made before he found himself in a position to make that choice? Or is it the choice where everything before that is irrelevant? Rather, it's everything from this point forward that's relevant. And if that's the case, then he did make a choice. Because choice is not a single event. Choice is a continuity of events. Choice is part of a string of events. You don't start making choices at a particular point. Choices are incumbent upon other choices. There are ramifications. Remember, Batman says you have to pay for it for the rest of your life. Therefore, your whole life is a choice. Since the day you were in your inception, there's a choice that was made that is going to determine everything else in your life. Now, it is again. This is not a deterministic argument. You're not predetermined. You're not preordained. What happened is that your future or what you're going to do is going to be based on that reality. Okay? Now, we don't know what those choices are going to be. There are several options, there are several possibilities, but all of which are already determined, or at least already, those options are there. I could choose to fly one day. That choice has not been made for me. However, it has been made for a bird somewhere. The bird cannot choose not to fly. It's not a choice that the bird has. Same way I cannot choose to fly. It is not an option that I have. I can choose to be whatever I can be. Thereby, my choices are based on my reality. It is based on, or at least they are based on my fact, my state of fact, my situation at a given time. So when people are talking about choices, we have to ask them that question. When does a choice begin? And when does it end? What consequences do choices have? And at which point the person who makes the choices own those choices? And is it ever the case that one choice is related to millions, thousands of billion, trillions of other choices? Okay? These are some of the questions you have to be asking.